The morning alarm echoed through the metal halls of the Galactic Defense Academy. Jake Martinez rolled out of his narrow bunk and stretched his arms above his head. His muscles ached from yesterday's training, but he felt ready for whatever the instructors would throw at them today. Jake walked to the small mirror mounted on his wall and looked at his reflection. Dark hair, brown eyes, and a face that had seen 25 years of life on Earth. He still could not believe he was here, representing humanity among the galaxy's best warriors. 6 months ago, he had been a regular Marine stationed in California. Now he stood in a space station orbiting the planet Kepler 442b, learning to fight alongside aliens. The shower water was cold, as always. Jake had learned that most alien species preferred lower temperatures than humans. He dressed quickly in his standard academy uniform, a gray jumpsuit with his name patch and the small Earth flag on his shoulder. The flag looked tiny compared to the elaborate symbols worn by his classmates. The dining hall buzzed with different languages and sounds. Jake grabbed a tray and filled it with what the Academy called universal protein blocks and synthetic vegetables. The food tasted like cardboard, but it kept him alive. He found an empty table and sat down, watching his fellow students eat their various meals. At the table next to him, Crixtal the Catherian warrior ate glowing blue cubes that hummed with energy. Her body was tall and thin, covered in natural, crystal formations that could channel electricity. She had been polite to Jake, but he could tell she thought humans were weak. Across the room, Gormath the Goliathan consumed what looked like small rocks. The massive alien stood 8 feet tall and had skin like gray stone. His people were known throughout the galaxy as unbeatable fighters. Gormath had never spoken directly to Jake, communicating only through angry grunts. Near the window, Shissik, the Zaraki, picked at a bowl of writhing insects with his sharp claws. The reptilian alien's scales changed color based on his mood, and right now they showed a dull green that Jake had learned meant boredom. Shissik found most academy training too easy. Jake finished his meal and headed to the main training complex. The hallways were filled with students from 12 different species, all walking toward the same destination. Today was special. Today they would face the Academy's most challenging simulation. Commander Zethkar stood at the front of the large briefing room. The Vraxian officer was shorter than most of his students, but his presence filled the space. His purple skin was marked with scars from real battles, and his 4 arms moved with precise military discipline. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had survived wars that lasted centuries. "Today you face the Predator simulation," Commander Zethkar announced. "This test has been given to students for 50 years. Only 3 beings have ever lasted more than 10 minutes against the creature you will encounter." Jake felt his heart beat faster. Around him, his classmates shifted in their seats. Even the confident ones looked nervous. "The Shadow Maw," the commander continued, "is based on the deadliest predators from across the galaxy. Our programmers spent decades creating this digital creature. It has the speed of a Centauri wind hunter, the strength of a Terran grizzly bear, the intelligence of a Vraxian war beast, and the camouflage abilities of a phantom spider." A holographic image appeared above the commander's head. Jake stared at the creature and felt his stomach drop. The Shadow Maw looked like someone's worst nightmare come to life. It had a long, muscular body covered in black scales that seemed to absorb light. 6 legs ended in claws that could cut through metal. Its head was elongated, with rows of teeth like broken glass and eyes that glowed red in the darkness. The simulation takes place in a hostile jungle environment, Commander Zethkar explained. You will have access to standard Academy weapons and equipment. Your goal is simple. Survive as long as possible. The record is 14 minutes and 37 seconds, held by War Master Theclon of the Dominator caste. Jake raised his hand. Sir, what happens if we defeat the creature? Several of his classmates laughed. Commander Zethkar's expression did not change. That has never happened, Cadet Martinez. The Shadow Maw adapts to every strategy, learns from every encounter, and becomes stronger with each battle. It is designed to be unbeatable. The commander dismissed them to prepare for the simulation. Jake walked back to his quarters, his mind racing. He had studied files on all his classmates, and each one was impressive in their own way. Krixtal could generate powerful energy shields and lightning attacks. Gormath's stone-like skin could stop bullets, and his strength could crush steel. Sisek was faster than anything Jake had ever seen, with natural weapons and poisonous bite. What did Jake have? He was reasonably strong for a human, had good reflexes, and was trained in various fighting techniques, but compared to his alien classmates, he felt ordinary. Humans had no natural armor, no energy powers, no poison, no enhanced speed or strength. They were just human. Jake sat on his bunk and thought about home. He remembered his grandfather's ranch in Texas, where he had spent summers as a child. His grandfather had taught him to work with animals, horses, cattle, even the wild coyotes that sometimes came near the property. Every creature has its own language, his grandfather used to say. You just have to learn how to listen. The announcement came over the speakers. All combat students report to Simulation Bay 7. Jake stood and checked his equipment one final time. Standard Academy combat suit, basic energy weapon, emergency medical kit, and survival gear. Nothing special. Nothing that would give him an advantage over a creature designed to kill. He walked to the simulation bay with his classmates. The room was large and white, with a raised observation deck where the instructors would watch. In the center sat 12 simulation pods, each one designed to create a perfect virtual environment. Commander Zethkar addressed them one final time. You will enter one at a time. The creature will hunt you. When you are eliminated, you will be returned here. There is no shame in losing quickly. The Shadow Maw has defeated warriors far more experienced than you. Jake looked around at his classmates. Most of them appeared confident, even eager. They had spent their entire lives training for moments like this. They were natural predators themselves, bred for war and conquest. Jake took a deep breath and tried to calm his nerves. In a few hours, he would face something designed to be the perfect killer. He had no idea that this encounter would change everything, not just for him, but for the entire Academy. The simulation was about to begin. The Shadow Maw stared at the ration bar lying on the jungle floor between them. Its massive head moved back and forth, red eyes shifting from the food to Jake and back again. The creature had never encountered this behavior before in its 50 years of simulated existence. Jake remained perfectly still on his log, watching the predator's body language. He had spent enough time around animals to recognize confusion when he saw it. The Shadow Maw's tail twitched nervously, and its claws dug small furrows in the earth. Every line of its body said it was ready to attack, but something held it back. In the observation deck above, the alien instructors whispered frantically among themselves. Commander Zethkar stood with his forearms crossed, his purple face showing deep concern. This was not how the simulation was supposed to work. The Shadow Maw should have eliminated the human within minutes, not stood there looking puzzled. "Should we end the simulation?" asked Instructor Veltar, a thin blue alien with large eyes. "The human is clearly malfunctioning." "No, Commander," Zethkar replied slowly. "Let us see what happens." Jake's classmates pressed against the observation windows, equally confused. Krixtal's crystal formations flickered with nervous energy. "What is he doing?" she asked in her musical voice. "Being stupid," Gormath rumbled. The massive Goliathan warrior shook his stone-like head. "The creature will kill him as soon as it decides he is not a threat." But Shisek's scales had shifted to a thoughtful blue color. The reptilian warrior's head tilted as he studied Jake's posture. "Look at how he sits," Shisek said quietly. "He is not showing fear or aggression. My people know this stance. It is how we approach young hatchlings. Down." In the jungle simulation, Jake continued his strange strategy. He began making soft, clicking noises with his tongue, similar to sounds he had used to calm nervous horses on his grandfather's ranch. The Shadow Maw's ears, if they could be called ears, swiveled toward the sound. "Easy there," Jake murmured in the same tone he might use with a spooked animal. "Nobody wants to hurt you." The Shadow Maw took another step forward, then stopped. Its nose extended toward the ration bar, sniffing carefully. Jake could see the internal conflict in the creature's movements. Its programming told it to attack. But something else, perhaps curiosity, held it back. Jake slowly reached into his pack again and pulled out his water bottle. The Shadow Maw tensed, but Jake's movements remained calm and predictable. He took a small sip, then set the bottle on the ground near the ration bar. "Thirsty too?" Jake asked conversationally. "It's pretty humid in here." The creature's red eyes fixed on the water bottle. Jake noticed that its tongue flicked out occasionally, testing the air. He remembered reading that many predators had enhanced senses of smell and taste. The Shadow Maw was gathering information about him in ways human senses could not detect. Commander Zethkar activated his communication device. "Computer, run a diagnostic on Simulation Bay 7. The Shadow Maw appears to be malfunctioning." "Systems functioning normally," the computer replied in its mechanical voice. "The Shadow Maw is operating within acceptable parameters." "Then why has it not eliminated the human?" the commander demanded. "The Shadow Maw is programmed to respond to prey behavior," the computer explained. "The human is not exhibiting standard prey responses. The creature is analyzing the situation." Jake had no idea about the conversation happening above him. He was focused entirely on the magnificent predator in front of him. The Shadow Maw had moved closer, now only about 6 feet away. Jake could see details that had not been visible on the viewing screen. The way its scales seemed to shift color slightly in different light, the intelligence in its glowing eyes, the careful way it placed each massive paw. "You're not just a killing machine, are you?" Jake said softly. "There's something else in there." As if responding to his words, the Shadow Maw lowered its head and sniffed the ration bar more closely. Its long tongue extended and touched the food package. After a moment of consideration, the creature picked up the bar in its teeth and bit down. The wrapper crinkled as it chewed experimentally. In the observation deck, several instructors gasped. Instructor Veltar's large eyes grew even larger. "It is eating the food," she whispered. "The Shadow Maw never eats during simulations." Jake smiled as he watched the creature chew. "Good?" he asked. "Sorry, it's not exactly gourmet cooking." Shadow Maw finished the ration bar and looked at Jake expectantly. Its posture had changed subtly, less threatening, more curious. Jake reached into his pack again and pulled out another ration bar, but this time he only unwrapped it halfway, before tossing it over. The creature caught the food easily and ate it more enthusiastically than the first one. When it finished, it sat back on its haunches in a position that reminded Jake of a giant dog waiting for another treat. "Computer," Commander Zethkar said urgently, "what is the Shadow Maw's current threat assessment of the human?" "Threat level? Minimal," the computer replied. "The human shows no aggressive intent or capability to cause significant harm." "And what is its hunger status?" "The Shadow Maw was programmed with basic survival needs to make it more realistic," the computer explained. "It appears the human has triggered feeding behaviors that override hunting protocols." Jake had discovered something the Academy designers had never intended. In their effort to make the Shadow Maw as realistic as possible, they had given it complex, behavioral programming that went beyond simple aggression. The creature had needs and responses that could be influenced by the right approach. Jake stood up slowly from his log, moving with the same careful deliberation he had shown throughout the encounter. The Shadow Maw watched him but did not tense for attack. Instead, it seemed almost relaxed, like a well-fed cat in a sunny window. "Want to take a walk?" Jake asked, gesturing toward a path through the jungle. To everyone's amazement, the Shadow Maw stood and began following Jake as he walked deeper into the simulated forest. The creature stayed about 5 feet behind him, close enough to strike if needed, but far enough to show it was not feeling threatened. "This is impossible," Commander Zethkar muttered. "The simulation has been running for 15 minutes. The longest anyone has ever survived was 14 minutes and 37 seconds. But Jake was not just surviving, he was thriving. As they walked through the jungle together, he continued talking to the Shadow Maw in the same calm, friendly tone. He pointed out interesting plants and made observations about the environment, treating the deadly predator like a hiking companion. "See that tree there?" Jake said, pointing to a massive trunk covered in glowing moss. "I bet that's where smaller creatures come to drink. The moss probably collects moisture from the air." The Shadow Maw's head turned to look where Jake was pointing. Its red eyes studied the tree with what seemed like genuine interest. When a small, bird-like creature landed on the glowing moss, both Jake and the Shadow Maw watched it together in comfortable silence. In the observation deck, Jake's classmates had gone from confusion to amazement to something approaching awe. Even Gormath, who had dismissed humans as weak, was staring at the screen with his mouth open. "How is he doing this?" Crixtal asked, her crystal formations pulsing with nervous energy. Shisek's scales had shifted to a deep purple color that indicated deep thought. "He is not treating it as an enemy," the reptilian warrior said slowly. "He approaches it as if it were a companion." "Ridiculous," Gormath rumbled, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "It is a predator, a killer." "So are we," Shisek replied quietly. "But we are also more than that." Jake had walked nearly a mile through the jungle with his strange companion. The Shadow Maw followed him faithfully, occasionally moving ahead to investigate interesting scents or sounds, but always returning to his side. When they reached a small clearing with a stream running through it, Jake sat down on a rock and pulled out his water bottle again. The Shadow Maw approached the stream and drank deeply. Its massive head lifted, water dripping from its jaws, and it looked at Jake with what could almost be described as gratitude. 25 minutes, announced the computer. "New survival record established." But Jake was not thinking about records. He was thinking about the incredible creature beside him and wondering what other surprises it might hold. In his wildest imagination, he could not have predicted what would happen next. Jake sat by the stream and watched the Shadow Maw drink. The creature's massive form moved with surprising grace as it lowered its head to the water. When it finished drinking, it lifted its head and looked directly at Jake. For the first time since the simulation began, Jake felt he was truly seeing the intelligence behind those glowing red eyes. The Shadow Maw moved closer to Jake's rock, each step careful and deliberate. Jake remained still, letting the creature make its own choices. When it was close enough that Jake could have reached out and touched its scales, the Shadow Maw lowered itself to the ground in a resting position. Its massive body settled beside Jake's rock, like a giant, deadly pet choosing to nap near its owner. In the observation deck, Commander Zethkar felt something close to panic rising in his chest. This was not just unusual. It was completely impossible according to everything he knew about the simulation. He activated his communication device again. "Computer, explain the Shadow Maw's current behavior patterns." "The creature appears to have formed a social bond with the human," the computer replied matter-of-factly. "This was not anticipated in the original programming." "Social bond?" Commander Zethkar's voice rose higher than usual. "It is a predator simulation, not a companion." "Animal!" "The programming includes complex behavioral algorithms to increase realism," the computer explained. "The human has activated responses that were included but never before triggered." Jake had no idea about the crisis he was causing above. He was completely focused on the amazing creature beside him. Now that the Shadow Maw was resting, Jake could see details that had been hidden during movement. The creature's scales were not simply black. They had an iridescent quality that showed hints of deep blue and purple in the filtered jungle light. More importantly, Jake could see that his earlier observation had been correct. The Shadow Maw was indeed favoring its left side, and now Jake could see why. There was a patch of scales along the creature's left flank that looked different from the others, slightly paler and arranged in a pattern that suggested old scar tissue. "You've been hurt before," Jake said softly, gesturing toward the scarred area. "That must have been a tough fight." The Shadow Maw turned its great head toward Jake and made a sound unlike anything it had produced before, a low, rumbling noise that vibrated through the ground. It was not a growl or a threat display. It sounded almost like a giant cat purring. Jake smiled and slowly extended his hand toward the creature. "May I?" he asked, as if the Shadow Maw could understand human politeness. The creature did not pull away. Jake's fingers made contact with the scales along the Shadow Maw's neck, and he was surprised by their texture. They were not cold and slimy as he had expected, but warm and smooth, almost like polished stone. The Shadow Maw's purring sound grew louder. "You like that, don't you?" Jake said, gently stroking the creature's neck. "When was the last time anyone touched you without trying to hurt you?" In the observation deck, several instructors had to sit down. Instructor Veltar's blue skin had turned pale. "He is petting it," she whispered. "The human is petting the Academy's ultimate weapon." Krixtal's crystal formations were pulsing so rapidly they looked like strobe lights. "This cannot be real," she said. "The simulation must be broken." But Shisek was studying the scene with his predator's understanding of body language. "Look at their postures," he said quietly. "The human shows no fear, no aggression. The Shadow Maw responds with relaxation and trust. This is not broken programming. This is social bonding. Gormath shook his massive stone head. Impossible. You cannot bond with a killing machine. Can you not? Shisek replied. Do not warriors bond with their weapons? Do not hunters bond with their prey animals before the kill? Perhaps humans simply approach bonding differently than we do. Down in the simulation, Jake continued his gentle examination of the Shadow Maw. As he stroked the creature's scales, he discovered other interesting details. There were small scars, scattered across its body, each one telling a story of past battles. The creature had lived a violent existence, but it had also survived and learned. Jake noticed something else too. Despite its fearsome appearance, the Shadow Maw showed signs of loneliness. It leaned into his touch like an animal starved for affection. Its red eyes never left Jake's face, as if it could not believe this gentle contact was real. You've been alone for a long time, haven't you? Jake said softly. Fighting simulation after simulation, always being the monster that everyone tries to destroy. That must be exhausting. The Shadow Maw made another one of its purring sounds and shifted position to give Jake better access to scratch behind what Jake thought might be its ears. The appendages were more like fin-like projections, but they were clearly sensitive. When Jake scratched them gently, the creature's entire body relaxed further. Jake pulled out another ration bar and offered it to the Shadow Maw. This time, instead of tossing it, he held it out for the creature to take from his hand. The Shadow Maw's massive jaws opened, revealing teeth like broken glass, but it took the food with surprising gentleness. Its teeth never came close to Jake's fingers. Good manners, too, Jake said with a smile. Someone taught you to be careful with smaller creatures. As the Shadow Maw ate, Jake noticed something moving in the trees around the clearing. Small, bird-like. Creatures had gathered to watch this unprecedented scene. They seemed as curious about the interaction as the instructors above. Jake wondered if they were part of the simulation's ecosystem, or if the computer had added them to observe this strange, new behavior. After finishing the ration bar, the Shadow Maw stood and walked to the edge of the clearing. It looked back at Jake and made a sound that seemed almost like a question. Jake understood immediately. You want to show me something? Jake asked, standing up from his rock. The Shadow Maw turned and began walking deeper into the jungle, moving, slowly so Jake could keep up. Every few steps, it looked back to make sure he was following. Jake found himself being led by the galaxy's most feared predator simulation, like a tourist being shown around by a friendly guide. They walked for several minutes before reaching their destination, a cave hidden behind a waterfall. The Shadow Maw had led Jake to its den. The creature disappeared behind the falling water and emerged a moment later carrying something in its mouth. It was a collection of objects, bits of metal, colored stones, and what looked like pieces from previous simulations. The Shadow Maw had been collecting souvenirs from its encounters, building a small hoard like a dragon in an old Earth story. Jake knelt down and examined the collection with genuine interest. You keep trophies, he said with wonder. You remember everyone you fought. The Shadow Maw arranged its treasures carefully, showing them to Jake like a child showing off a prized possession. There was something almost sad about the display. These were the only connections the creature had to the outside world, memories of brief encounters that always ended the same way. Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out a small item, a coin from Earth that he carried for luck. He held it out to the Shadow Maw. Here, Jake said. Something to remember our meeting. The creature took the coin gently and added it to its collection. Then it looked at Jake and made its purring sound again, clearly pleased with the gift. In the observation deck, Commander Zethkar realized that the simulation had been running for over an hour, far longer than any previous attempt. More importantly, the human had not just survived the encounter with the Shadow Maw, he had befriended it. "Computer," the commander said quietly, "what is the Shadow Maw's current status regarding the human?" "The creature has classified the human as a non-threatening social companion," the computer replied. "It is no longer operating in hunting mode." Commander Zethkar felt a chill run down his spine. If the Academy's ultimate weapon could be turned into a pet by a simple human, what did that say about their entire understanding of combat and warfare? The answer to that question would shake the Academy to its foundations. 3 hours had passed since Jake entered the simulation. In the observation deck, a crowd of instructors and senior Academy officials had gathered to witness something that should have been impossible. The viewing screen showed Jake sitting, cross-legged beside the Shadow Maw in a peaceful meadow, both of them watching alien butterflies dance among strange flowers. Admiral Kektar had arrived an hour ago, summoned by increasingly frantic reports from Commander Zethkar. The Admiral was a veteran of dozens of wars and had helped design the Shadow Maw simulation personally. Her scaled face showed the deep confusion of someone watching their understanding of reality crumble. "Explain to me again," Admiral Kektar said in her gravelly voice, "how a human cadet has spent 3 hours playing with our ultimate weapon." Commander Zethkar's 4 arms gestured helplessly at the screen. He approached it without aggression. He fed it, he touched it, and now... The commander's voice trailed off as he watched Jake scratch behind the Shadow Maw's ear fins while the creature made contented purring sounds. "And now our most feared predator acts like a domestic pet," Admiral Kektar finished grimly. On the screen, Jake was examining the Shadow Maw's scarred flank with gentle fingers. The creature had rolled onto its side to give him better access. Completely trusting and relaxed. Jake had fashioned a bandage from part of his emergency medical kit and was carefully cleaning the old wound. "There," Jake said softly as he finished wrapping the bandage around the creature's torso. "That should help it heal properly." The Shadow Maw twisted its long neck around to sniff the bandage, then looked at Jake with what could only be described as gratitude. It pressed its massive head against Jake's chest in a gesture that looked remarkably like a hug. In the observation deck, Crixtal was recording everything with her built-in crystal memory systems. "My people must see this," she said in wonder. "The way he touches it, the way he cares for its injury. This is not how warriors behave." "No," agreed Shisek, his scales shifting to thoughtful purple. "This is how companions behave. How family behaves." Gormath remained silent, but his stone-like features showed deep concentration. The massive Goliathan warrior was reconsidering everything he thought he knew about strength and dominance. Jake had discovered something else about the Shadow Maw during their time together. The creature was playful. When Jake had thrown a stick into the meadow as an experiment, the Shadow Maw had bounded after it like an enormous dog and brought it back, clearly expecting Jake to throw it again. "You want to play?" Jake had asked, with delight, and the game had continued for nearly an hour. Now they were resting in the shade of a large tree, the Shadow Maw's massive head resting in Jake's lap while he gently stroked its scales. The creature's red eyes were half closed in contentment, and its purring rumbled through the ground like distant thunder. "Computer," Admiral Kektar said urgently, "run a complete system diagnostic. I want to know if there are any malfunctions in the Shadow Maw's programming." "All systems functioning normally," the computer replied. "The Shadow Maw is operating exactly as programmed." "Then how do you explain its current behavior?" "The Shadow Maw was programmed with a complete behavioral matrix to make it as realistic as possible," the computer explained. "This includes social behaviors, emotional responses, and adaptive learning capabilities. The human has activated behavioral pathways that were included in the programming but never before accessed." Admiral Kektar felt a cold realization creeping over her. "Are you saying that the Shadow Maw has always been capable of this behavior?" "Correct," the computer confirmed. "However, all previous subjects approached it as a threat to be eliminated. The human is the first to approach it as a potential companion." Down in the simulation, Jake was sharing his lunch with the Shadow Maw. He had broken his remaining ration bars into small pieces and was hand-feeding them to the creature, who accepted each morsel with gentle care. Between bites, Jake told the Shadow Maw stories about Earth, about his grandfather's ranch, about the animals he had known, about the concept of friendship between different species. "On my world," Jake explained, "we have animals called dogs. They used to be wolves, fierce predators like you. But over thousands of years, humans and wolves learned to live together. The wolves helped us hunt, and we gave them food and shelter. Eventually, they became our best friends." The Shadow Maw listened intently, its red eyes focused on Jake's face. Whether it understood the words or just responded to the tone, it seemed fascinated by the story. "The amazing thing is," Jake continued, "both species became better because of the partnership. Dogs became more intelligent and social. Humans became better hunters and learned to work as a team. We helped each other evolve." As if to demonstrate the point, the Shadow Maw suddenly lifted its head and looked toward the edge of the meadow. Its ears swiveled forward, and its body tensed slightly. Jake followed its gaze and saw movement in the trees. Another simulated creature. Something that looked like a cross between a bear and a giant spider. The new creature stepped into the meadow and saw Jake and the Shadow Maw together. It paused, clearly confused by the scene. Jake could see its smaller predator brain, trying to process what it was seeing. The Shadow Maw stood smoothly and positioned itself between Jake and the newcomer. It did not attack or threaten, but its body language was clear. Jake was under its protection. The spider bear creature studied them for a moment, then decided this situation was too strange to risk and disappeared back into the forest. "You protected me," Jake said with wonder, looking up at the Shadow Maw. "Even though I'm not part of your pack, you protected me." The Shadow Maw looked down at Jake and made a soft, chittering sound that seemed almost like laughter. Then it lowered its great head and gently nuzzled Jake's hair. In the observation deck, the implications of what they were witnessing began to sink in. Admiral Kektar turned to Commander Zethkar with a grim expression. "How many years have we been using this simulation to train warriors?" she asked. 50 years, the commander replied. "Thousands of students have faced the Shadow Maw. And in all that time, no one thought to try a non-violent approach?" Commander Zethkar's purple skin darkened with embarrassment. "It never occurred to us, Admiral. The simulation was designed as a combat test. But it was not limited to combat," Admiral Kektar said slowly. "We programmed it to be realistic, which means we gave it the capacity for more than just violence. We just never bothered to explore those other capabilities," She turned back to the viewing screen, where Jake was now playing a gentle game of tug-of-war with the Shadow Maw using a vine. Both human and creature were clearly enjoying themselves. "Computer," Admiral Kektar said, "based on current behavioral patterns, what is the probability that the Shadow Maw would attack the human if threatened?" "Analysis indicates a 97% probability that the Shadow Maw would defend the human against any threat," the computer replied. "The bond between them has reached levels typically associated with pack behavior or parental protection instincts." "Pack behavior," the Admiral repeated thoughtfully. "The human has essentially adopted our ultimate weapon into his pack." On the screen, Jake had found a stream and was showing the Shadow Maw how to skip stones across the water. The massive predator watched intently, then tried to mimic Jake's movements with its own claws. The stones sank immediately, but the Shadow Maw seemed delighted by the attempt. Jake laughed, a sound of pure joy that echoed through the simulated forest. The Shadow Maw responded with its own version of laughter, a musical chirping sound that none of the observers had ever heard before. 4 hours, announced the computer. "Current survival time, 4 hours, 12 minutes, 36 seconds. Previous record exceeded by over 300%. But Jake was not trying to set records. He was simply enjoying the company of a remarkable creature that everyone else had seen only as a monster. As he watched the Shadow Maw attempt to skip stones again, Jake realized that this experience was changing more than just Academy records. It was changing how he thought about what it meant to be strong, what it meant to win, and what it meant to be human in a galaxy full of warriors. The bond between them was now unbreakable, and its consequences would ripple far beyond a single simulation. Crystal went first. The tall Catherian warrior stepped into her simulation pod with confidence, her crystal formations already beginning to glow with stored energy. Jake watched from the observation deck as the pod activated, and Crystal disappeared into the virtual jungle. The main viewing screen showed her perspective. Dense green trees stretched in every direction, their leaves dripping with moisture. Strange sounds echoed through the forest. Bird calls that sounded like screams and the distant roar of unknown beasts. The air looked thick and humid, making everything seem green and alive. Crystal moved carefully through the undergrowth, her energy shields crackling around her body like a protective bubble. She held her weapon ready and turned her head at every sound. For the first few minutes, nothing happened. Then the temperature reading on her suit began to drop. "The Shadow Maw is near," Commander Zethkar said from behind Jake. "It always announces itself with cold." Jake felt a chill run down his spine as he watched the screen. Crystal's breath began to form clouds in the suddenly cold air. She spun around, looking for the threat, but saw nothing. Her energy shields grew brighter as she channeled more power into them. The attack came from above. The Shadow Maw dropped from the tree canopy like a black nightmare, its 6 clawed legs spread wide. It hit Crystal's shields with tremendous force, and sparks flew in all directions. The Catherian warrior fought back, sending bolts of lightning at the creature. But the Shadow Maw moved too fast. Jake watched in horror as the creature seemed to flow around Crystal's attacks like liquid shadow. Its claws found gaps in her shields, and within seconds the simulation ended. Crystal reappeared in her pod, breathing hard and covered in sweat. 2 minutes, 18 seconds, announced the computer. Sisek went next. The Zoraki warriors. Scales turned bright orange with excitement as he entered his pod. On the screen, Jake saw him sprint through the jungle at incredible speed, his claws extended and ready for battle. Sisek was a natural hunter, and he moved through the trees, like he was born there. When the cold came, Shishak was ready. He climbed high into the canopy and waited, perfectly still. His scales changed to match the bark of the tree, making him nearly invisible. Jake had to admire the reptilian warrior's patience and skill. The Shadow Maw appeared below, prowling through the jungle floor and sniffing the air. For a moment, Jake thought Shishak might actually surprise the creature. The Zaraki warrior waited until the Shadow Maw was directly beneath him, then dropped down with his claws aimed at the creature's neck. But the Shadow Maw had been waiting too. It spun around faster than should have been possible and caught Shishak in mid-air. Jake winced as he watched the two predators fight, a blur of claws and teeth and scales. Shishak was fast, but the Shadow Maw was faster. The simulation ended with the Zaraki warrior pinned beneath the creature's massive form. 4 minutes, 12 seconds, the computer announced. One by one, Jake's classmates entered the simulation and faced the Shadow Maw. Each one brought their species' natural advantages and trained skills. Gormath the Goliathan lasted the longest so far, using his incredible strength to throw trees at the creature and his stone-like skin to absorb its attacks. But even he fell after 7 minutes when the Shadow Maw used its acid blood to eat through his defenses. As Jake watched each battle, he began to notice patterns. The Shadow Maw was not just a mindless killing machine. It learned from each encounter, adapting its tactics to counter whatever strategy it faced. Against Krixtal's energy shields, it had used speed and precision. Against Shishak's stealth, it had used patience and superior senses. Against Gormath's strength, it had used cunning and its acidic blood. But Jake noticed something else too. The way the creature moved, the way it positioned itself, even the way it hunted. There was something familiar about it. It reminded him of the big cats he had seen in documentaries, or the wolves his grandfather had told him stories about. The Shadow Maw was a predator, but it was also an animal. When his turn came, Jake felt strangely calm. He walked to his simulation pod and looked back at the observation deck. Commander Zeth Carr was watching him with interest, probably wondering how quickly the human would be eliminated. His alien classmates looked sympathetic but doubtful. Humans were new to the galactic community, and they had not proven themselves in combat yet. Jake stepped into the pod and felt the world change around him. Suddenly he was standing in the humid jungle, surrounded by the sounds and smells of an alien forest. The air was thick and made breathing difficult. Strange plants grew everywhere, some of them moving slightly as if they were alive. Jake checked his equipment and began to move through the jungle. Unlike his classmates, he did not run or try to find the highest ground. Instead, he walked slowly and quietly, stopping frequently to listen and observe. He was not trying to hunt the Shadow Maw or prepare an ambush. He was trying to understand the environment. The jungle was full of life. Small creatures moved through the underbrush, and strange birds called from the trees. Jake noticed tracks in the soft earth, some from creatures he recognized, others completely alien. He knelt down and examined them, trying to read the story they told. When the cold came, Jake felt it immediately. His breath formed clouds, and frost began to appear on the nearby plants. He knew the Shadow Maw was close, probably watching him right now. But instead of raising his weapon or activating his defensive systems, Jake did something unexpected. He sat down. Jake found a fallen log and made himself comfortable, keeping his hands visible and his weapon lowered. He knew the creature was out there, studying him just as he was trying to study it. Most of his classmates had been eliminated, because they had immediately treated the Shadow Maw as an enemy to be destroyed. But what if there was another way? The bushes nearby rustled, and Jake caught a glimpse of black scales moving through the shadows. He did not move or react with fear. Instead, he spoke quietly into the jungle. "I know you're there," Jake said, in a calm voice. "I'm not here to fight you." In the observation deck above, Commander Zethkar leaned forward with surprise. The other instructors began whispering among themselves. This was not how the simulation was supposed to go. The Shadow Maw emerged from the jungle like a living nightmare. It was even more terrifying in person than on the viewing screen. Its red eyes glowed in the green light of the forest, and its claws left deep gouges in the earth as it moved. The creature was easily 12 feet long and built for killing. But Jake did not run. He did not raise his weapon or call for help. Instead, he remained sitting on his log and watched the creature approach. His heart was beating fast, but he forced himself to stay calm. The Shadow Maw stopped about 10 feet away and tilted its massive head, studying this strange prey that refused to run or fight. Its red eyes fixed on Jake's face, and for a long moment, human and digital predator simply looked at each other. Jake could see the confusion in the creature's posture. This was not how the simulation usually went. The Shadow Maw had been programmed to hunt and kill, but its prey was not behaving like prey should. "You're beautiful," Jake said quietly, and he meant it. Despite its fearsome appearance, the Shadow Maw moved with the grace of a natural predator. Every line of its body spoke of power and intelligence. The creature took a step closer, its head lowered, and its muscles tense. Jake could see its nostrils flaring as it tried to understand what he was, but he also noticed something else. The way the Shadow Maw favored its left side slightly, as if protecting an old injury. Jake slowly reached into his pack and pulled out a ration bar. The movement made the Shadow Maw tense, ready to spring, but Jake moved carefully and kept his motions smooth and predictable. "Hungry?" Jake asked, and tossed the ration bar halfway between them. In the observation deck, Commander Zethkar stood up in shock. No one had ever tried to feed the Shadow Maw before. The emergency faculty meeting was called at dawn the next day. Admiral Kektar sat at the head of the conference table, her scaled face showing the exhaustion of someone who had not slept in 36 hours. Around the table sat the Academy's most senior instructors, all looking equally troubled. Jake's simulation had finally ended after 6 hours, not because he had been eliminated, but because Admiral Kektar had ordered it stopped. The Shadow Maw had been so bonded to Jake that when the simulation ended, it had tried to follow him out of the virtual environment. The computer had been forced to create a separate containment protocol just to handle the creature's distress at being separated from its new companion. "The situation is unprecedented," Admiral Kektar began, her voice hoarse from hours of debate. "In 6 hours, a human cadet has completely subverted our most advanced training simulation. The question before us is simple. What do we do about it?" Instructor Veltar raised one of her thin blue arms. "With respect, Admiral, I believe the human has cheated. The simulation was designed for combat, not whatever this was." "The human used no unauthorized equipment," Commander Zethkar replied wearily. "He employed no weapons beyond his basic kit. He simply approached the situation differently than anyone ever has before." "Differently?" Instructor Thekmore's rocky voice rumbled with disapproval. The granite-born instructor had trained warriors for over 2 centuries. "He turned our ultimate weapon into a pet. This is not warfare. This is madness." Across the Academy, word of Jake's accomplishment had spread like wildfire. Students whispered about it in the corridors, and several alien news networks had picked up the story. The headlines were not flattering. Human cadet breaks academies. Ultimate test, and Earth's representative makes galactic weapon his pet. In the student dormitories, Jake's classmates were having their own heated discussions. Crixtal paced back and forth in the common room, her crystal formations flickering with agitation. "I have been training for this simulation my entire life," she said to the assembled students. "My people's greatest warriors have studied the Shadow Maw's capabilities for decades. How does a human with no natural weapons, no armor, no enhanced abilities succeed where we all failed?" Shisek coiled on his cushion, his scales showing deep purple thoughtfulness. "Perhaps that is exactly why he succeeded," the reptilian warrior said quietly. "We approached it as warriors. He approached it as something else." "As what?" Gormath demanded. The massive Goliathan was clearly struggling with the implications. "He showed weakness. He fed it instead of fighting it. In my culture, such behavior would be seen as cowardice." "Would it?" Shisek challenged. "Or would it be seen as a different kind of strength? The human faced the same creature we did, felt the same fear, yet chose compassion over combat. That requires its own form of courage." Meanwhile, Jake sat alone in his quarters, unaware of the chaos he had caused. He was reading reports about animal behavior on various alien worlds, trying to understand more about interspecies bonding. The experience with the Shadow Maw had opened his eyes to possibilities he had never considered. A soft chime indicated someone at his door. Jake opened it to find Admiral Kektar standing in the corridor, her expression unreadable. "Cadet Martinez," she said formally. "We need to talk." Jake stood at attention. "Yes, Admiral." "At ease, son," Admiral Kektar said, stepping into his quarters. "This is not a formal disciplinary meeting yet." She looked around his small room, noting the animal behavior texts displayed on his computer screen. "You have been studying," she observed. "Yes, Admiral. I wanted to understand what happened in the simulation." Admiral Kekatar nodded slowly. "That makes two of us. Cadet, I need you to explain something to me. How did you know the Shadow Maw would respond to your approach?" Jake considered the question carefully. "I did not know, Admiral, but I grew up around animals, and the Shadow Maw reminded me of creatures I had seen before. Powerful, potentially dangerous, but also intelligent and social. I thought it might be lonely." "Lonely," Admiral Kektar repeated. "You thought our ultimate weapon was lonely." "Yes, Admiral. Think about it. For 50 years, the only contact it has had with other beings is through combat. Everyone who enters its simulation tries to kill it or survive its attacks. When was the last time anyone just talked to it?" The Admiral sat down heavily in Jake's only chair. "The faculty is debating whether to expel you from the academy," she said bluntly. "Some believe you have made a mockery of our most sacred traditions." Jake felt his heart sink, but he kept his expression steady. "I understand, Admiral. I did not intend to cause problems." "But you did cause problems," Admiral Kektar continued. "Do you know what happened when we tried to run the simulation with another student today?" Jake shook his head. The Shadow Maw refused to fight. It spent the entire simulation looking for you. When the student tried to engage it in combat, the creature seemed sad, depressed. It eventually just curled up in its den and ignored everything around it. The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. "I broke it," he said quietly. I ruined the simulation for everyone else. Perhaps, Admiral Kektar said. Or perhaps you revealed something we should have seen long ago. Tell me, Cadet, what do you know about the history of warfare in this galaxy? Jake straightened. Only what I have learned in classes, Admiral. Most conflicts are resolved through superior firepower, advanced technology, or tactical superiority. Exactly. For 10,000 years, galactic civilizations have followed the same pattern. Identify threats, develop weapons to eliminate them, apply overwhelming force. It has worked, after a fashion. Admiral Kektar stood and walked to Jake's small window, looking out at the stars. But it has also created a galaxy where every species sees every other species as a potential enemy, where the first response to the unknown is always violence. She turned back to Jake. Then you walk into our simulation and do something none of us considered possible. You turned an enemy into an ally through compassion and patience. You demonstrated that there might be another way. Jake waited, sensing there was more to come. The faculty vote was split. Admiral Kektar continued. Half want you expelled for breaking protocol. Half want you studied to understand how you accomplished the impossible. And what do you want, Admiral? Admiral Kektar smiled for the first time since entering Jake's quarters. I want you to do it again. Admiral, tomorrow we are going to modify the simulation. Instead of trying to kill the Shadow Maw, other students will attempt to replicate your success. You will serve as their instructor, teaching them your methods. Jake felt a mixture of excitement and terror. Admiral, I am not sure my approach can be taught. It was not really a technique. It was just being myself. Perhaps that is exactly what we need to learn. Admiral Kektar replied. How to be human in a galaxy that has forgotten there are alternatives to violence. As the Admiral left his quarters, Jake sat down at his computer and stared at the animal behavior studies on his screen. Tomorrow, he would try to teach alien warriors, something that came naturally to humans, but seemed revolutionary to the rest of the galaxy. He would try to teach them how to make friends instead of enemies. Outside his window, the stars looked different somehow. Less like distant threats, and more like distant possibilities. Jake had no idea that his simple act of kindness toward a simulated creature would eventually change the course of galactic diplomacy, but that transformation was already beginning, one confused alien student at a time. The modified simulation began 3 days later. Jake stood in the briefing room facing his former classmates, feeling more nervous than he had when facing the Shadow Maw alone. Teaching combat techniques was one thing, but teaching compassion to alien warriors seemed impossible. Before we begin, Jake said, his voice uncertain, I want to make something clear. What I did in the simulation was not planned. I did not have a strategy or a technique. I just responded to what I saw. Crixtal's crystal formations flickered with skepticism. You must have had some method, she insisted. No one survives 6 hours against the Shadow Maw by accident. Jake thought carefully about how to explain something that felt as natural as breathing. On my world, we have a saying, you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. It means that kindness often works better than force. Sissek's scales shifted to curious blue. But the Shadow Maw is not a fly. It is an apex predator. Yes, Jake agreed. But it is also intelligent, social, and capable of forming bonds. I saw those qualities and responded to them instead of focusing only on its ability to kill. Gormeth's rocky features showed deep confusion. How could you see social qualities in a creature designed for murder? Jake walked to the viewing screen and activated footage from his original simulation. "Watch its body language," he said as the shadow maw appeared on screen. "See how it tilts its head when curious? How it pauses to assess rather than attacking immediately? How it responds to sounds and changes in its environment?" The alien students watched the footage with new eyes. For the first time, they were looking at the shadow maw not as a threat to overcome, but as a being with its own motivations and behaviors. "I still do not understand," admitted Velkari, a tall insectoid student whose people communicated through chemical signals. "My species approaches unknown situations with caution and analysis, but we analyze for weaknesses to exploit, not for friendship opportunities." Jake nodded. "That is exactly the difference. You analyze to find ways to defeat. I analyzed to find ways to connect." Commander Zethkar, who had been observing from the back of the room, stepped forward. "Demonstrate," he said simply. "Show them." Jake's first volunteer was Crixital. The Catherian warrior entered the simulation pod with visible reluctance, her energy fields already crackling with defensive power. Jake coached her through the communication system. "Remember," Jake said as the jungle environment loaded around her, "you are not prey and you are not predator. You are a visitor in its home. Act like a respectful guest." On the viewing screen, they watched Crixital encounter the shadow maw. The creature emerged from the undergrowth and stopped, its red eyes fixed on the glowing warrior. Instead of immediately charging her shields or preparing to fight, Crixital took Jake's advice and simply stood still. The shadow maw approached cautiously, clearly remembering its interaction with Jake. It sniffed in Crixital's direction, testing her scent for signs of aggression or fear. "Good," Jake said through the communicator. "Now try to show it you are not a threat. Lower your energy fields." "Lower my defenses." Crixital's voice was tight with fear. "It will kill me." "Trust the process," Jake encouraged. "If it wanted to kill you, it would have attacked already. It is trying to understand what you are." Slowly, reluctantly, Crixital dimmed her energy shields. The shadow maw moved closer, its massive head tilting with curiosity. When it was close enough to touch, it extended its nose toward her and sniffed gently. "It is smelling me," Crixital whispered in wonder. "Animals gather information through scent," Jake explained. "It is learning about you. Try offering it something. Food, water, anything that shows goodwill." Crixital pulled out a ration bar with shaking hands and held it toward the creature. The shadow maw sniffed the offering, then gently took it from her grasp. As it chewed, it made the same purring sound Jake had discovered. "It is pleased," Crixital said, her voice filled with amazement. "The Academy's ultimate weapon is pleased with my gift." The simulation continued for 2 hours. Crixital never achieved the deep bond that Jake had formed, but she managed to exist peacefully alongside the creature without violence. When she emerged from the pod, her crystal formations were glowing with excitement. "I felt its curiosity," she said to the assembled group. "It was not trying to hurt me. It was trying to understand me. How did we miss this for 50 years? Shisek went next, and his natural predator instincts actually helped him. The reptilian warrior understood body language and territorial behavior, and he was able to communicate respect for the shadow maw's space while showing his own peaceful intentions." The two predators sat together for an hour, neither threatening the other. Gormath struggled the most. The Goliathan warrior's people solved problems through strength and dominance, concepts that did not translate well to Jake's approach. But Even he managed a brief, tense coexistence with the creature. This is more difficult than any combat I have experienced, Gormath admitted after his simulation. To stand defenseless before a predator and trust in its restraint requires a courage I did not know existed. Over the following weeks, word of the new training spread throughout the academy. Senior officers began requesting demonstrations. Alien diplomats arrived to observe the sessions. The simple act of befriending a simulation had become a galactic phenomenon. But the real breakthrough came when Dr. Helen Carter, a human xenobiologist, arrived from Earth to study Jake's methods. She brought with her knowledge that the Academy had been missing. What Jake demonstrated, Dr. Carter explained to a packed auditorium, is a fundamental aspect of human evolution. Humans are one of the few species that regularly forms symbiotic relationships with other species. We domesticated wolves, horses, cattle, cats, and dozens of other animals, not through dominance, but through mutual benefit. She activated a holographic display showing various human-animal partnerships throughout Earth's history. Humans survived not because we were the strongest or fastest, but because we were the best at building alliances. We turned potential enemies into partners. Admiral Kektar leaned forward in her seat. Are you saying this ability is unique to humans? Not unique, but highly developed, Dr. Carter replied. Most species evolve either as predators or prey, with clear hierarchies and territorial behaviors. Humans evolved as social hunters who learned to work with other species for mutual survival. She gestured toward Jake, who was sitting in the front row. When Jake encountered the Shadow Maw, he unconsciously applied thousands of years of human evolutionary programming. He looked for ways to communicate, to establish trust, to find common ground. To him, it was natural. To warriors, trained in dominance-based thinking, it seemed impossible. Commander Zethkar spoke up from the back of the auditorium. But how can this approach be applied to real combat situations? Not every enemy can be befriended. Dr. Carter smiled. That is exactly the point, Commander. Jake's success was not in avoiding combat. It was in recognizing that combat was not necessary. He identified a situation where cooperation was possible and chose that path instead. She looked around the room at the assembled alien officers. How many conflicts in galactic history might have been resolved differently if someone had first asked whether violence was truly the only option? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jake could see the alien officers struggling with concepts that threatened their fundamental understanding of strength and victory. But he could also see curiosity in their eyes. The same curiosity that had led him to offer food to a dangerous predator instead of shooting it. That curiosity would change everything. After the presentation, Jake found himself surrounded by alien officers asking questions he could barely answer. How do you teach intuition? How do you train someone to see potential friends instead of potential threats? Start small, he told them. Look for one thing you have in common with your opponent. Find one way to show respect instead of dominance. Ask yourself what they need instead of what they threaten. It sounded simple, but Jake was beginning to understand that simple things were often the hardest to learn, especially for species that had spent millennia believing that strength meant the ability to destroy rather than the wisdom to create. 5 years later, Jake stood once again in the Academy briefing room, but everything had changed. Where combat simulations once dominated the curriculum, new courses had been added. Interspecies communication, conflict de-escalation, and alternative resolution strategies. The Academy had not abandoned its military training, but it had expanded its definition of what it meant to be a warrior. Jake wore the uniform of a lieutenant in the Galactic Diplomatic Corps, with commendation, ribbons that told the story of his unconventional career, the Order of Peaceful Contact from the Andromedan Council, the Cross-Species Understanding Medal from the Confederation of Peaceful Worlds. Most importantly, the small pin that marked him as a certified instructor in what was now officially called the Martinez Protocol. Today's lesson, Jake announced, to his class of new cadets, is about seeing beyond first impressions. His students represented 12 different species, just as his original class had. But these cadets had volunteered for diplomatic training, drawn by stories of the human who had turned the Academy's ultimate weapon into a companion. They watched him with eager attention rather than skeptical doubt. "Lieutenant Martinez," asked Cadet Zix-Ara, a young Vraxian whose purple skin marked her as Commander Zethkar's daughter, "is it true that the original Shadowmaw simulation still refuses to fight?" Jake smiled. "Why do you not ask it yourself?" He activated the main viewing screen, which showed a live feed from the Academy's most unusual facility. The former Simulation Bay 7 had been converted into a permanent habitat for the Shadowmaw, now renamed Shadow by the students who visited it regularly. On the screen, Shadow lounged in a sunny meadow, surrounded by a group of young cadets from various species. The creature that had once been the Academy's most feared challenge was now gently playing with a ball, while alien children laughed and cheered. "Shadow has become our most effective teacher," Jake explained to his class. "Students learn more about interspecies cooperation from 1 hour with Shadow than from months of traditional combat training." Cadet Morgeth, a young Goliathan, raised his massive stone hand. "But, Lieutenant, what about real enemies? Beings who cannot be befriended?" It was the question Jake had been asked hundreds of times over the past 5 years. "The Martinez Protocol is not about making friends with everyone," he replied. "It is about recognizing when friendship is possible and having the courage to try. Sometimes the greatest victory is turning an enemy into an ally." Jake activated another display, showing statistics that had shocked the galactic community. "Since implementing diplomatic first contact protocols based on our research, hostile encounters with new species have decreased by 73%, trade agreements have increased by 200%, and the number of active military conflicts in our sector has dropped to its lowest level in recorded history." The cadets murmured among themselves in their various languages. These numbers represented more than statistics. They represented lives saved, worlds preserved, and civilizations that had learned to cooperate instead of compete. "The human approach," Jake continued, "is not about being weak or naive. It requires tremendous courage to approach a potential threat with open hands instead of weapons. It requires wisdom to recognize when someone is attacking from fear rather than malice. And it requires strength to choose compassion when aggression would be easier." Cadet Velnari, whose insectoid features showed deep concentration, clicked her mandibles thoughtfully. "My people have a saying, 'The strongest nest is built with many hands.' Perhaps this is what you mean by human strength." "Exactly," Jake replied. "Humans survived and thrived not by being the best individual fighters, but by being the best at building teams, alliances, and partnerships." The door to the briefing room opened, and Admiral Kektar entered with a familiar figure beside her. Commander Zethkar, now bearing the insignia of a full admiral himself, nodded respectfully to Jake. "Lieutenant Martinez," Admiral Kektar announced, "you have new orders." Jake stood at attention, curious about what new challenge awaited him. "The Outer Rim colonies have reported contact with a previously unknown species," Admiral Zethkar explained. "Initial encounters have been tense. The aliens appear highly aggressive and have destroyed several unmanned probe ships. Standard protocol would be to send a battle fleet," Admiral Kektar added. "But the Galactic Council has requested that we try the Martinez protocol first. You will lead a diplomatic mission to make first contact." Jake felt the familiar mixture of excitement and terror that came with such assignments. "What do we know?" "About them, Admiral?" "Very little," Admiral Zethkar replied. "They are large, heavily armored, and seem to respond to any approach with immediate violence. Most military advisors consider them a serious threat." "In other words," Admiral Kektar said with a slight smile, "they are exactly the type of challenge you specialize in." Jake nodded, accepting the assignment. As the admirals left to prepare his mission, Jake turned back to his cadets. "Your homework," he announced, "is to study everything we know about aggressive species that were later revealed to be acting from fear or misunderstanding. Look for patterns, for common mistakes in first contact, for opportunities that were missed." As the cadets filed out, chattering excitedly among themselves, Jake remained in the briefing room and looked up at the viewing screen. Shadow was now napping in the afternoon sun, surrounded by sleeping cadets of various species who had curled up against the creature's warm scales. 5 years ago, those same cadets would have been learning to kill Shadow. Now they were learning to trust it, and it was learning to trust them. The change seemed small, but Jake had come to understand that small changes could reshape entire galaxies. His communicator chimed with an incoming message. "Jake!" came the excited voice of Dr. Helen Carter from Earth. "I heard about your new assignment. I wanted you to know that we have been analyzing the probe destruction patterns from your new species." "What did you find?" Jake asked. "The attack patterns are not random," Dr. Carter explained. "They are precise surgical strikes against the probe's sensor arrays and communication equipment. These aliens are not trying to destroy. They are trying to blind and silence." Jake felt a spark of understanding. "They are defending themselves against what they perceive as surveillance." "Exactly. And Jake, there is something else. The energy signatures from their weapons suggest biological components. I think these beings might be symbiotic with their technology, possibly even with their ships." The implications hit Jake immediately. A species that lived symbiotically with their technology would naturally view mechanical probes as potential threats or invasive parasites. Their aggressive response was not malice. It was an immune reaction. "Dr. Carter," Jake said slowly, "how would such a species react to a biological approach? Living ships, organic technology, natural materials?" "They might see it as less threatening," Dr. Carter replied. "Or they might see it as a more serious biological threat. There is only one way to find out." Jake smiled, already formulating plans for his mission. "Then I guess I had better go make some new friends." As he left the academy to prepare for departure, Jake passed through the courtyard where a statue had been erected 5 years earlier. It showed a human figure sitting peacefully beside a large predatory creature, both of them looking up at the stars. The inscription at the base read, "The greatest victory is the battle that does not need to be fought." Jake paused to read the inscription, as he did every time he passed the statue. It reminded him of his grandfather's words about every creature having its own language. The galaxy was full of languages Jake had not yet learned to speak, but each new encounter taught him that communication was always possible, even with species that destroyed first and asked questions later. As his ship lifted off from the Academy, spaceport, Jake looked down at the facility that had changed his life and the lives of countless others. Shadow was visible in its meadow, playing with a new group of cadets who would grow up believing that strength meant knowing when not to fight. The outer rim awaited, with new species to meet and new friendships to forge. Jake had no idea what he would encounter, but he knew one thing for certain. He would approach it with open hands and an open heart. After all, that was the human way, and increasingly, it was becoming the galactic way as well. The universe was vast and full of wonders, and Jake Martinez was heading out to make friends with as many of them as possible. Behind him, the Academy continued its new mission of teaching warriors that sometimes the most courageous thing you could do was offer your enemy a gift instead of a weapon. The transformation that had begun with one human and one lonely predator was spreading across the galaxy, one peaceful contact at a time.